Welcome, everybody, to another episode of the Grit, Give, Recognize, Implement Time podcast. I'm very excited for today's episode because I have my good friend Jenn Waller with me today. We're both triathletes. We love talking Ironman and Ironman races, and we have a lot of common too, I think, in the way that we work with folks. So I'm very excited to have her on today, have her talk about what she sees in her work with people in the weight loss and the personal training space, and even in her own history as an athlete in terms of what this is all about, right? Overcoming those sneaky little negative thoughts that can sneak into our brains and start to take hold. So without further ado, I'll turn it over to Jenn and let her introduce herself to you. So Jenn, if you would.
Thanks, Steve. I'm super honored to be on here. As Steve said, I'm Jenn. I live in Vancouver, BC, Canada. I have a lot of things under my belt, but I really focus on, I'm a personal trainer. I'm a registered counselor. I'm a medical exercise specialist and have created something called the Me Project. And I love the fact that Steve really works on grit, because I think that is so important. And why I created the Me Project is, whether you're trying to get out of a rut, whether it's weight loss, whether it's career, whether it's whatever, it's really an inside job. And we are so good at looking externally for everything, but the answers actually come this way. So I'm super excited to talk about some of these pieces today.
Yeah, and I love that, because the Me Project, by the way, phenomenal fan of it. And the why is it's so introspective, to your point, and it really is about empowerment. And that's one of the huge things that grit helps people with, right? Is the empowerment piece. So I love that you brought that up right from the bat. And we'll talk about more at the end of today, how to get in touch with Jenn, how to find the Me Project. But to that point, I'd love to open this up actually of maybe even in the Me Project of what are perhaps some of those things that kind of start creeping in, right? The mindsets that maybe do hold us back, that either you face or you've seen your clients really have to face. And we'll get into how to overcome that. But I'm just curious, what do you see?
I think what I see the most is like there's this expectation that we all kind of know is there, but none of us have really stopped and thought about, what is that expectation? There's something I'm striving for and something that's going to be that good enough, but we don't actually sit and talk about it or name it or say where it comes from or anything like that. So we're constantly striving for this thing that's out there that we can't even identify, which constantly puts us in a position of, oh, I'm not there and I can't do it and I'm failing again. And here we go again, I'm trying. And it's like, well, what are you even trying to get to? And I think a huge problem that we have is we've got this expectation on ourselves that we haven't even stopped and said, what does this mean? And so we think we have to change or do everything. And we're reaching something that we don't even know, like we haven't even identified what it is. So we totally set ourselves up for failure before we've even started.
Yeah, we put all this pressure on ourselves to succeed that we're psyching ourselves out of it ahead of time, if I'm hearing that correct, right? Yeah.
Totally.
Yeah. And there's a lot of resonance there, because I hear that a lot with folks as well, is we tend to sometimes be our own worst enemies because we put so much pressure on ourselves for success, for doing things quickly, for making it happen right away, right? Versus allowing that time. And I know it's a difficult thing for a lot of folks, right? If I can't master something quickly, I give up and I don't do it. Yeah. So I think that's a great thing that you've highlighted, that it's a real struggle for all of us. I've been there. I'm going to raise my hand, right? And I think, and I hope I don't mind you don't mind me speaking for you, but I venture to say you've been there as well, right?
Totally.
Yeah.
Totally. Yeah.
So with that, what's actually a way you find works well for you or other people you've worked with to help overcome that hurdle?
I think actually like taking the time to sit down and talk about it, and
Yeah.
actually like connecting with somebody and saying, like, what is it that you want to achieve? And actually being able to hone that down, because I think sometimes we set these goals of, I want to feel better, or I want to look better, or I want to lose weight. Well, what does that actually mean? Like, do you have this end goal in sight? Is it even realistic? And have you actually stopped and named it? Because, like, maybe you have this image of you're going to be 120 pounds and you're nowhere near that, and you haven't even actually stopped and said, well, what does that look like? What am I going to get from that? How am I going to feel from that? What other things are going on if I get there? And it's just this thing that sits externally for so long that we never identify,
Mm.
that we're never going to get there because we actually haven't said what it is. And so I think for me, when I work with people, is to really get under the, where are you actually trying to go? Because
Yeah.
I think it's the Wiz or Alice in Wonderland, I think, movie from years ago, where she comes across, I think it's a Cheshire cat or the caterpillar, I'm not sure, but it's like, which way do you want to go? Well, I don't know. Well, then any path will do. Right. So it's like, if we don't actually say where we want to go, then we're constantly spinning our wheels trying to go in a million different directions, and we're actually not going anywhere.
Yeah. And I kind of want to highlight the fact real quick that you said Alice in Wonderland, a movie from years ago, just
Sure, I
because I
butchered
know
it.
we're in the similar genre, right, in terms of age brackets. And a quick aside, I actually I was at a wedding where I think the pastor was quoting the movie Hook from the early '90s. He's like, "Wait, were you guys even born then?" And they weren't. And I'm like, "Oh man." Uh, so I think it's a great example, and I think in there too, right? Even in Alice's exploration, she's got to figure out exactly what's going on, where she is, and what's kind of transpired so that she can understand the circumstances that she's now found herself into. And like you said, name it, call it out, bring it forth, bring more clarity to it, specificity. So I understand, well, I have this goal, but do I really understand it? And I found when you name something,
Mhm.
it's more personal too. It makes it more real. And that's actually something I have my clients do as well, as I have them name their journeys. And I have it in a way where it's a positive naming, right? Versus a negative naming. Not like I want to stop being bad at math, for example, right? Just a random example is, what is it that you really want to do? What's the actual positive, uplifting version of that? But I think that's a key that you've highlighted that maybe often isn't there enough, honestly, which is naming it and giving it a positive, serving name, right? And then understanding truly, like you said, what's underneath there. So I know exactly what this looks like. And it makes it more measurable and tangible and easy to achieve when it's actually spelled out. So again, some great points in there. And do you find there's a lot of success there with the people that you work with in naming it and in bringing more specificity to it?
Totally. And I think, like you say, I think because we spend so much of our time trying to get to some destination that we haven't even like identified, being able to put an identification piece on it, not that that has to be the end result, but at least it's somewhere that we're going, then there's success. Because if you don't actually name it or say it, how do you know if you're being successful?
Right.
Like, how do you know? How do you know if you're on the right track? How do you know if you're taking the right steps if you don't know where you're going? So I think that's such a huge piece. And like with life spinning and things going on, when we know we're going to the grocery store to get something, we know we're going A to B. So we know whether we've achieved it or not.
Right.
But if we're just trying to reach something out there, we never know.
Yeah. Well, and what I hear in there, honestly, is another great principle again, Jen, that you're bringing out. And it's feedback. It's tangible feedback. I need, as a human being, to know how I'm doing on my goals, and it doesn't matter if that's weight loss or if that's at work. I need that feedback, right? No one wants to go into that mid-year or that end-of-year review with your boss and then just be slapped in the face by you're minimally successful or you've not met your job, right? Or maybe you're doing great, but we have heard nothing from the people at B. So we assume maybe we're not meeting what we need. And that's a huge point of having that measurable feedback so that we know how we're doing. It's a little bit easier when it's more tangible things, right? Like weight loss. But when we focus on, say, the intangible and the mindset, I find that's a little bit harder for people to define. And maybe I'm curious for your thoughts on this, but I often find that having a active reflection on where was I,
Hmm.
where am I now, and how far have I come really helps people digest kind of that tangible feedback of how much progress am I actually making towards that goal.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more. And I know even in like, we use the sport of triathlon, sometimes training logs. That's why training logs are
Yeah.
amazing. You can actually flip back or however many pages and say, okay, this is where I was. So yeah, maybe I'm not where I want to be, but I'm definitely not where I was either. So I can actually put a notch in my belt, or I can say, okay, I'm getting something from this. And what that does to the chemistry in the brain actually helps us want to keep going forward.
Right.
And like you said, even with feedback, it's like if there isn't a lot of change, then that's just information too. It's like, okay, so what I'm doing maybe isn't working. I still know where I want to go, but now I can evaluate the action steps that I'm taking to get there and adjust as needed.
Right. And another little sneaky tool actually is to force yourself to rate something on a scale of 1 to 10, right? Of where am I now? Like if I had to quantify my number for this goal or my satisfaction even with it, depending on what it is. Like if I say my balance in life, how satisfied on a scale of 1 to 10 am I? That forces you to quantify and inherently pick a number. And then we can understand, well, what does that number actually look like? And then where do I want to go? What number is that? And what does that number actually look like? And that trick can actually help us make sense of some things that are less tangible to make them more tangible for us on feedback, and then see how we progress from number to number as well.
Totally.
Yeah. I actually maybe want to dive down just a really brief tangent and talk about triathlon very quickly, because I think it's a great example with the world we're living in right now and not having races. I know you and I were planning on doing Ironman Canada together in Penticton, BC this year, right? Which actually was a couple months ago, or would have been a couple months ago. And now hopefully in 2021, like how are you maybe personally handling race season or preparing for races with everything that's going on?
That's it's such a crazy question, because sometimes I feel like, because of what we do, people think we've got it all figured out. And what I've really realized deep inside of me, again, it gets back to that goal and identifying where I want to go. Because when the race got taken away, is how I felt. Like I felt like almost like I grieved something. I stopped and I completely had my little meltdown, and I had my little, well, what's the point? And really had to reflect on what that was about for me. And kind of looking at it and what was the shutdown and what was the disappointment and, what was my perception of it? Because it doesn't mean it was reality, but I had a feeling and I had, an experience when that got canceled that I was like, well, if I don't have anything to work towards, then why bother?
Right.
And with COVID and everything else, it just put me in a place of 2 or 3 weeks of just doing nothing. But what I had to learn is that for me, what is it like to be in that place of doing nothing? Because there's a whole other bank of lessons that came with that. And really understanding that internal drive of why was I doing the Ironman to begin with? And what was it that, was motivating me? And I think looking back, going into next year, I'm racing it regardless if the race actually happens. And that's what I've decided for me, is that there is a goal that I have to finish that goes so deep and so strong. And now that we've kind of done a COVID summer, I know I can realistically do something. Maybe it's not in Penticton, maybe it's locally, but I am going to do it that day. And that's what's important to me, is actually finishing. Like that's my goal. And so, yes, this year, you call it a wash, call it whatever. For me, it was actually, I don't look at it as something was taken away. I'm actually looking at it as I gained so much, because it made me come face to face with why do I do what I do, and take it from the external and really like take the opportunity to go deep with it internally and go, what is this for me and why? Like, why am I motivated to do it? What is my payoff? What is the price if I don't do it? What is the price if I do it? And get really clear internally on that.
Yeah. And I love the example because it's a very real thing for you and I. And it's a very personal thing because Jen and I have actually never met in person. And this was going to be the second time we were planning on to meet in person. The first time I got injured and I couldn't go to the race. So Jen was left on her own. But this was going to be a great opportunity for us to really meet, connect in person, and have that shared experience, because this is going to be your first full Ironman,
Yeah.
and I think we'll see how it plays out. So hopefully at that point it'll be my third full Ironman. We'll see how how it all plays out, but it's definitely a struggle, I think, for us athletes to stay motivated during this time. And I know that I've gone through varying things like you have as well throughout the summer. But what's interesting for me is, to your point about motivation and why I think it's actually so important to understand what really does drive us, is there's things here at play that go beyond that race for me. And they are qualifying for the US national team, right? So the world championships is something that's a goal of mine. Getting faster and being able to qualify for the Ironman world championships is a goal of mine. And the way that I looked at this season was, you know what, I have this great opportunity in front of me because my races, which admittedly I had too many scheduled, are now off the books, and I can focus on getting stronger and faster, building that base endurance, building that base strength, so that when I get back to racing, I will be in better condition and shape than I was going into this season, because now I have an extended off season that affords me the opportunity to do that. So having those larger goals in mind motivated me. I've also tried and used multiple different workout challenges where I would sign up, I could bike, run, or swim, and I can get a medal at the end of it. But I have one I'm still doing, which is like 35, I'm staring at it right now, 3,521 miles. It's called a marathon, is what they've called it, is you're essentially running, biking, swimming across America. And I'm chipping away at that. But those are the things that I know motivate me. I like getting the medals. I like working towards getting stronger and faster. So I really, during this time, leverage those because I don't have that opportunity to do the races. But I know that's been different for a lot of folks and a lot of athletes, right, who have said, you know what, there are no races on the schedule. And that's the thing that really motivates me. So I'm going to stop training.
And I think what's interesting is I'd love to take that just a little step deeper,
Yeah.
because I'm wondering how many of your listeners, I'm even noticing my beliefs coming up as you're talking, because I'm like, oh, I would love to do that, but I could never do that. I could never be in the running for a nationals. I could never be like, I don't want to say it's a hobby, because committing to an Ironman is not a hobby, but my goal is to finish. So my goal right now is very different than yours. And I think what's interesting is so many different things motivate us. Like you're motivated by performance. And I wonder how many people are listening that are like, yeah, that's nice, but that's not me.
Yeah.
Whereas my journey through most of my life has been about performance. This one has become very personal, because if I can go deep into that emotion, this was really a self-worth issue. Like really, when it came down to me this summer, when the races were canceled and I came face to face to what is my goal and why, it really boiled down to a self-worth issue. Am I good enough? Am I worth the time? You know, putting in the training and the impact on my family. Am I worth, you know, the money that I'm going to spend on this? Am I worth all these pieces? And I ended up in this moment of trying to visualize myself finishing. And I broke down. And for me, it was because, oh my God, I actually am capable. I am enough. And yes, there are steps to get there. And yes, there are things that I have to do. But my beliefs have always stopped me, because it's like, well, you're never going to be able to do it. You're going to fail. You're going to give up. You're not disciplined enough. Like all of those things started flying around my head. And what I had to come face to face with was that deep, deep belief that I'm not good enough and I'm not worth it.
Yeah.
And so that, I mean, knowing that has allowed me to make some different choices and move forward. But it's still like, as soon as I hear the performance, I'm like, but that's who I used to be. And that's not where I am right now, but it's not where I am right now. And that's okay.
Yeah.
Right. Like that's totally okay. My goal right now is to really internally believe that I am worth the time and the effort and all the pieces that go in, and keeping my word to actually do what it takes to finish, because I am worth finishing.
Yeah. And I love the fact that you, maybe unbeknownst and subconsciously, literally just went through those steps of grit, right? Because you're giving yourself permission to be human, which is all about calling out these beliefs that are not serving us, coming face to face with them, understanding them, recognizing that there is a choice, that I can move past them and embrace what does serve me. I am good enough. I am capable. I am worth it. Knowing what holds us back, those non-serving beliefs, knowing their opposites, what is going to help and serve us, and knowing I have that choice and actively choosing to make that choice to embrace the serving thoughts and beliefs is what makes it so much easier to help take that one small step at a time, or put one arm in front of the other when you're swimming, right? To get to where you want to go. And I love the example because you're absolutely right. It looks a little bit different for each of us. And that's okay,
Mhm.
because we all share in this human condition. And believe it or not, we all have these beliefs that hold us back. And we all are capable of overcoming them and leveraging what is going to serve us and taking it one small step at a time to get to where we want to go. And I applaud you for it, because it is not necessarily always an easy journey to do, right? It can be very difficult to take that first step and recognize that, there are some things that maybe I think about myself that aren't helping me get to where I want to go. And it takes a certain amount of courage to confront those and to work through those.
For sure.
Yeah. What else maybe that we didn't touch on perhaps helped you, do you think, overcome kind of those questions and get back on track? Because I know you're training now, and working towards this goal. So is there anything else maybe that you think our listeners would get a benefit from?
I think, yeah, like being open and
Okay.
willing to not have it look a certain way.
Yeah.
Um, Being willing to give myself the opportunity and the time and space to actually do the introspective work, because, like you
Mm,
say, it's not easy and it's
yeah.
scary. And I was so worried about all my junk, coming up. And would it be too much? Can I handle it? It's COVID. It's this. It's that. It's like, all the excuses. And for me, I think I let it highlight things. It's like, okay, but not only does this happen in my race life, this also happens in some of my relationships. This
Mm,
also happens in some of my career stuff. This also happens, you know, over here. And by letting a few close people in, that was highlighted for me. But it also was like, okay, so this is just your pattern. Don't judge it. Don't, it's not good or bad. It's neutral. So now that you can see it, you get an opportunity to do what you want with it. So I think for me, it was key to let somebody else in, but it was also key to give myself permission and make it okay for feeling that way.
mm. Yeah, getting the support of others, right? And having the comfort level and safety, psychological safety with
Yeah,
that person, right? To really be able to open up and have that conversation and go through that introspective process.
yeah.
Yeah.
And what was really interesting for me is I had a really good friend that was like, how long I've been waiting for you to say something like this? And I was like, pardon? And she was just like, when you hold that all in, you're not only robbing yourself the
Yeah.
opportunity to open or shift or whatever, you're robbing the people around you because you're not fully yourself either.
Yeah.
And I was just like, wow, okay, that means something to me. And it's like, where does this pattern not only show up in racing, but like I said, in my relationships and even with my kids? It's that like just holding my cards here and
Yeah.
not wanting to admit, that I was struggling or not wanting to admit these things. And since opening that up, like a lot of things in different aspects of my life have opened up.
Yeah. Our beliefs aren't necessarily singular, right? They are very applicable across the entirety of life. And it's an interesting point because we tend to view this segregation of work and life, but we're very much a holistic type of creature, right, as human beings. And I love that you highlighted that, because you're absolutely right. The belief maybe I hold and see come out in one way can very much influence these other aspects of my life and come out maybe in a different way that I haven't thought of, or until maybe I've brought attention to, weren't necessarily aware of. If that makes sense. Yeah.
Totally.
in that, if I asked you to maybe boil that down to like a couple key points, do you think for folks, what would you say were a couple key things that people could take away from that?
I think integrity,
Okay.
which to me right now means, not only doing what you say when you're going to do it, but also being willing to be honest about where you're at,
Mm,
even if it might be viewed as negative or viewed as uncomfortable or viewed as, I called myself out in a group the other day and I was like, hey guys, I am just feeling overwhelmed with all of this. And
yeah.
I was just in the moment, totally true, totally authentic. And, the response I got was amazing because I wasn't the only one feeling that way. And it actually created this whole different thing that was never going to happen had I not been honest in that moment.
Mm,
And it was amazing. And I think, yeah, like the openness, to be the willingness
yeah.
to be like, okay, I'm so used to seeing the world through this kind of lens, but there's a lot more out there, right? Like, so it's those kind of pieces. And just that willingness to be human.
Yeah. And shifting perspective in there too. And like you said, it is sometimes very difficult to do that for us as individuals. And I think that's where this support from others can help, because often an objective person like a coach or a counselor, therapist, or someone in that realm of the behavioral sciences, right, who is really trained at helping to be a neutral party, a non-judgmental party, can often help really open up those perspectives for us. And I find that tremendously helpful in the coaches that I work with, to help me have different perspective and get me out of that tunnel vision. And I think there's an added bonus there as well when we talk about awareness. I often say it's like that new person you meet in college, and once you meet them, you see them all the time because now you're aware of their face, right? And you can pick it
Yeah.
out of a crowd. And I think it's the same thing with the things that you talked about here. So the openness, the perspective, the giving yourself permission piece, to be human and to really recognize that we are capable, I think is another thing that I've heard maybe as a theme for you
Mhm.
today, as well, if I may. What have what do you think I maybe missed in that, if anything, that you want to kind of leave folks with as a lesson?
I think just the connection piece, because
Okay.
I think, we can learn so much from videos, we can learn so much
Yeah.
from books, we can learn so much from science and theory. Like I do
Right.
science and theory until I'm blue in the face. But I think it was the connection, that human aspect that not only made it available to represent the next step, but the next step that was right for me. Because, there's probably 100 people that could be in that similar position and there could be 100 different steps. And I think sometimes back to what we started with, it's this expectation.
Mm,
I think I felt stuck because I knew what I was supposed to do or I knew what I should do. But realistically, for where I was, that wasn't my next right step.
yeah.
And when I was trying to force that, round peg into a square hole, so to say, I just became more resentful, more stuck, and I withdrew further and further and further. And I think, like that human connection, that willingness to be open actually presented a number of steps that were actually good steps for me. And it was not what I was trying to push from the beginning.
Yeah. The quote of what the definition of insanity is, doing the same thing over and over again, expecting a different result, comes to mind as you were talking, just because you're highlighting we tend to get very singularly focused and trying to force that to happen. And like you said, maybe I'm trying to fit a square peg in a round hole, and it's not meant to go in or be the right thing. And I have to take that step back to adjust and say, you know what, maybe that's not the right path, and that's okay. Let me find out what that right path
Mhm.
is for me to take.
Yeah.
So that's another invaluable lesson. And actually, maybe one last question I'm curious about for you is, what's the timepiece been like for you in terms of this journey this year with COVID and the races and things that you've experienced? Not necessarily maybe a specific amount of time it's taken you, but if you were to take a look at the journey, was it instantaneous, or was it step by step and making small wins and chunks to get you to where you wanted to go ultimately, and maybe even still right, being on that journey and allowing the time to take it versus, oh, it happened right away?
definitely didn't happen like that.
Yeah.
Wish it didn't. Yeah, it's totally about the journey. And I think each step presents a different piece of the journey, right? Like when
Yeah.
you choose, like there was pieces that I got when I was in complete shutdown in the summer, not knowing what to do, not knowing who I was even. And there's pieces that I gained and steps that I gained by sharing that with somebody. There is pieces that I gained by, being back, let's say, on the road, to moving forward. And there's been lessons learned when I'm taking a step and the step doesn't end up being the way I think it should look.
Yeah.
I'm like, this was supposed to do this, dang it, and it didn't work. But having somebody along that journey to say, well, is it that it didn't work, or is it just you had an expectation again?
Yeah.
The expectation wasn't fulfilled, so now you're resentful. But is there something else there? Or instead of, life doesn't work on this linear path, right? Like we think if we do this and we do this and we do this, we're going to get to here. Sometimes it's about taking a step to a side to get a slightly different perspective of where you're going.
Yeah.
And it doesn't mean you're backwards. It doesn't mean you failed. It just means sometimes you need to take that little side step to get, a new perspective on where you're going. And then a whole different avenue, or journey opens up because of that. And again, it doesn't fit an expectation, but that might be the right step for me. And I'm still going to get where I'm going.
Yeah. It's another great illustrated point of how our journeys aren't just straight lines. I know we can't see the visual like on the podcast, but I'm waving my arm because typically we go up and down. We have these humps, but as long as it keeps going upward and generally trending upwards, right? That's what counts. And that's exactly what you're talking about right there, right? Is these small steps that maybe take me to the side, but open up new possibilities that ultimately end up taking me to where I want to go over the time it naturally takes for this to unfold
Right.
for me, right? To reach. Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, going back to your example, like maybe one day I will qualify for Kona.
Yeah.
But today my journey is taking me towards finishing. But until I finish, I don't even know what's possible yet. And so I think that's the other piece of being willing to not know, like to have a goal in mind, but not to be so closed that that's the only thing either. Of just who knows what's going to come after that. But right now, that is what I'm working towards. And I'm not going to worry about the what ifs because then it clouds and it puts more obstacles in the way.
Yeah.
But yeah, like who knows what's going to happen?
Yeah. I'm chuckling inside because I had a very similar conversation with my coach actually when I first talked to her about having her come on board as my Ironman coach and my goals of I want to make those world championships. I want to make Kona. Here's where I'm at. I know I'm not there yet, and I know I'm not putting a specific time frame on that because I need to see how this year unfolds. I need to see how next year unfolds. And I'm okay with it taking the time that it needs to take. And so I'm not putting that pressure on, like, I need to make championships now. I need to make worlds now, right? I'm not doing that because I know I will get very frustrated when I don't meet that, right? So I just chuckle because I literally had that conversation with her about my own goals and where I realistically stand, and then being okay with reevaluating them year after year when we set our new goals. So yeah, that's.
And I love that you said that because I think, especially in the world of weight loss, we expect it to be instantaneously.
Yeah.
And it's like, oh, but I need to lose this, whether it's a health reason, whether it's just, I want to feel better. And we expect it to happen like that. But like you said, like you got to take pieces at a time because you still have family, you still have kids, you still have work, you still have like whatever those things in your life that are happening, you can't just put everything to the side. Life doesn't stop so you can be there today.
Right.
Like you say, it's that constantly reevaluating. And when you start moving towards a different direction and moving towards some of these goals, the possibilities within that will open up naturally.
Yeah.
You can't just forget that everything else is there.
Right.
Or use it as an excuse not to do anything.
Right. And then another thing actually to accompany that I find when I talk about weight loss with folks, one of the things that I think is very difficult at first is accepting that sometimes naturally my body needs a break from forcing it to lose weight. And it's okay to actually level set for a week or 2 weeks or whatever it happens to be, because our bodies then adjust. We're no longer being forced into a mode where we're having less calories that we're burning, right? We're not quite in starvation mode, right? Because we haven't done such a limiter on our calories, but your body needs to sometimes just reset and say, okay, I need the amount of calories I need to operate and I can't cut anymore. And once I've recalibrated, I can then lose weight more easily and allow myself to continue on that journey. But I find that's one of the most difficult things, I think, to give ourselves permission to do, specifically to weight loss.
Totally.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about you actually for a moment, a little bit more. I'd love to let our listeners know a bit more about you and where they can find you and get in touch with you and everything. So please, if you wouldn't mind, share the information, share the
Yeah,
wealth.
so it's funny because in this whole spirit of reinventing, we're actually redoing our website because it's important to me to have a very different message right now. That's really in line with my values. But my Facebook is Prime Fitness Inc. And I can be reached on email at Jenn, Jenn, two N's, Waller, Waller at yahoo.com. And as the other stuff unfolds over the next week or two, it'll be a little easier to find me, but that's the two best places right now.
Yeah. What about the Me Project? Because I think I see that's on Facebook. It's on Instagram as well, if I'm not mistaken. Where
Totally.
can folks find that?
Same thing. The best place is just to email me directly. Like I said,
Okay.
we're creating a whole new platform because, you know, using yourself as a project is a big deal.
Yeah.
And we sort of start out with a signature 12-week program. Like you say, transformation doesn't happen overnight. And 12 weeks is usually when people sort of finish and say, okay, I'm ready to start now.
Yep.
And so we do have a program after that. But we really wanted to build something that really highlights the pieces within that. So the best thing right now, yeah, literally just through email or through Prime Fitness Inc. on Facebook as we continue to roll this out.
So one thing I will promise to do then for everyone is I will, in kind of the show notes, include that additional contact information when it comes available for Jenn, so you can reach out to her directly to do that. Anything else maybe you want to leave people with today, or maybe a snippet about what is to come with the reinvention that you want to share with folks?
I think don't wait. Like I think even like using myself as an example, like I kind of put a lot of things on hold because I wanted it to look perfect and I wanted to have all the pieces figured out. And I wanted to, like don't book a podcast until you have all these pieces done. And the reality is I am who I am. There's a million really good things going on. And yes, those pieces all haven't landed yet, but that doesn't have to stop the journey that we're on.
Right.
Yeah. Like don't wait because you're always going to be waiting until this, or same like weight loss, right? Like, or I'll use triathlon. I can't do a triathlon until I am at this amount of weight.
Right.
And if I waited to that, I still never would have done it. So I probably still never have done it. So don't wait.
Yeah. It's a great quote that I think highlights that is from Dr. King, where we don't have to see the whole staircase, just take the first step. Right. To your point, I don't have to see how this whole thing maybe unfolds. It's just literally taking that first step, because if I wait for everything to line up or all my ducks to get into a row, I may never get there. And I may never take that first step that can truly drastically change my life for the better and help me get to where I want to go.
Yeah. Perfect. Yeah.
Jenn, thank you so much for this awesome and amazing conversation. I've really, really enjoyed it. I think my listeners are definitely going to enjoy it as well. It's been an absolute pleasure to have you on the show, and I really look forward to actually having you back on and maybe diving into some more things in the future. So thank you very much for being here.
Thank you.
Yeah. Well, until the next time, everyone, be the movement in your life, and I look forward to what's coming up next and all these other great interviews that are on the docket.